Today I'm going to make Dr. Octopus arms. For this build, I used EVA foam, craft foam, contact cement, hot glue, conduit, fishing line, black paint, black tape, rope, foam dowels, pool noodles, DAP Alex Fast Dry, which is a sealant, sanding tools, safety gear, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. I'm going to start by making the fingers, which I made out of regular scrap foam. Well, regular to me. I mean floor tile foam, if you're new here. If you're not, then you are very aware that I have accumulated a ton of scrap foam over the course of all my projects. Too small to make anything other than Dr. Octopus claw arms. First, I drew the shape of one of the fingers onto cardboard from a waffle box. Waffle box? Haven't had a waffle in like 5 years. Man, I gotta get better about the hoarding. But hoarders make the best prop makers. Conundrum. Then I traced it onto a sheet of EVA foam. Then I cut them out using a razor pen and scissors, or box cutter. I didn't use the box cutter on this build, which is weird because I could use it on the noodles. I don't know why I didn't think to do that. It doesn't really matter. They each get you pretty much the same outcome. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Then I used the razor pen to make perpendicular cuts into the robot finger. Not quite deep enough to go all the way through. I don't want to separate these pieces. I want them to be able to bend, like the hinge of a door. In this way, the piece can hinge and act like knuckles. Then I made the base of the claw, so I guess that would be the wrist. Again, figuring it out on cardboard first, and then transferring it to another scrap piece of foam. This particular foam piece is thicker and darker than the finger pieces, so I'm using a white paint pen to trace it, just so that I can see it better. Then I cut it out with the razor pen. Inevitably though, the cut was not perfect. I did have to clean it up a little bit using my belt sander. Be sure to wear a mask while sanding because this kicks up a lot of dust. You don't want to breathe this. You don't want that in your lungs. There we go, much better. Now to make the fingers a bit less flat, I'm going to build sides for them. Again, making cardboard templates. This is absolutely necessary because I have to build 3 identical fingers and I want all of the shapes to be exactly the same. Guesswork would really mess up this project. I cut those out of 4mm craft foam. By the way, once I have all these shapes figured out, I'll make them available to you in my Etsy store, link below, just so that you don't have to deal with the same hassles that I have. This is pretty straightforward, although the fingertip had to be much longer in order to wrap all the way around the end. It also needed a bit of a parabola on one of the long sides so that the claw would appear to taper to a point. I attached the sides to each finger with super glue. The whole project used up only one of these little containers. Just for reference. This is going to be a super glue and hot glue build because the cement station with good ventilation is freezing right now. I had a few hours above 40 degrees the other day and was like, quick, get another layer of paint on the hydro stomper before it's too late. Taking advantage of climate change. But I digress. Notches had to be cut in the 4mm sides so that the fingers could bend. So after attaching the sides to each finger segment, I moved on to the details. There's supposed to be a texture on the exterior, like on some hand tools, so I created that by scoring the tip with my razor pen. I created a crisscross pattern that looks like this. It's not very visible, so I gave it a quick blast with the heat gun to allow the scoring crevices to open up a bit. It's a thermal reaction. Then I covered up the messy part with a strip of foam. It's actually the edge of the next detail, which appears to be another grip. I don't know why these are on the outside of the fingers, other than it looks cool, which, okay, yeah, so that's why it's on the outside, because it looks cool. It's pretty much how all decisions are made on movies. Well, also by budget, but that's a whole nother discussion. I trimmed the edges and made sure they were slanted. Then I super glued these little tabs to the sides. They're just greeblies made out of 2mm foam. Then I used teeny tiny piece cut from that massive roll. I mean, you can get it in smaller sheets, but I find the rolls more useful. Then I used some more EVA foam chainmail dots from Ben Eady's foam chainmail to simulate rivets. I gotta say the dots are coming in handy more often than the chainmail does. It's still cool though. This is what the whole thing looks like. I repeated all those steps to make the other 2 fingers. Took forever. I'm so glad that it doesn't have 5 fingers. It'd be mind-numbing. Oh, I added some 2mm foam to the interior just to keep the segments from ripping apart. It's very possible for the seams to rip under stress. I also added 2mm foam to the sides to cover up the holes made from the notches. They themselves don't impede the mobility of the finger because on the inside they're cut slanted at the end so that they don't get in the way. Then I got out my heat gun and heat treated it. This seals up the surface, so hopefully I don't have to do too many layers of paint. Then I painted it. The first layer kinda doesn't matter, so I'm gonna use flat black. I only say that because the first layer always gets absorbed into the foam, so I kinda just used whatever I have on hand. I have each piece resting on toothpicks sticking out of a chunk of polystyrene foam. This will keep them elevated and prevent them from sticking to the surface as the paint dries. Flat paint dries pretty quickly, so a short time later, I was able to move on to the next coat, which I did in gloss black. So when you're doing something metallic, you should really use gloss black underneath it to get the metal layer on top to really shine. As I did this, I was careful to avoid the seams along the hinges. I didn't want to glue the joints together and thus negate the articulation. Yeah, it's kind of the whole point. Although I'm sure there were some in the movie that were designed not to open, they usually have duplicates, depending on what the shot calls for. That's going to take a little bit longer to dry than the flat black paint, so I started on the arm while waiting. I'm going to use pool noodles for the arms. I think there's a few in the garage. See, I don't know if that'll be enough. There we go. Although it would be great if there was just one more purple one. Nice. Thanks, Wormhole to the Foam Dimension. Boy, I sure was lucky that just happened to be in the ceiling of my garage. I grabbed 3 of those to start with and headed inside. If you're starting from scratch with this build, then instead of pool noodles, I'd recommend pipe insulation foam, which I used during the Alien Xenomorph tail build. It's very similar. So I made this model out of offcuts first, just to be sure that it would work, and I think it will. Gonna use this little handsaw, which honestly is overkill. You could accomplish the same thing with the steak knife, but I try not to mix, cooking utensils with shop tools, just as a rule. Then I sliced the noodles into sections. Well, sliced out segments of the noodles to be more accurate. Basically, I cut notches slightly more than halfway through the noodle and roughly 1 inch wide and 1 inch apart. Very roughly. I did this down the length of the noodle. Then I did that some more. Like, for real, a lot more. This is basically most of the build is just monotonously chopping notches. So they were actually playing Spider-Man 2 on TV the other day, and I forgot how much I love that movie. In retrospect, it's way over the top, but that makes it great. Like, I appreciate over the top. Just the ER robot murder scene and the Evil Dead camera effects. There's even a chainsaw. What's that doing in a hospital, Sam Raimi? It's a medical chainsaw. It's used for making peg legs. Because of course it wouldn't be a Sam Raimi movie without a chainsaw, am I right? It's great. It's great. Speaking of saws, the hand saw is a bit too much to get the foam offcuts out, so I used a razor pen with the flat edge blade to make that cut. It's different from the standard razor pen blade, but standard in the little rectangular starter knife kit. I've got a more robust kit in here. It's with like 1,000 blade replacements, but the sharpening stone I've been using has prevented me from needing that so far, so it's buried. Oh, that's an important thing to point out for new people. You gotta sharpen your blade because EVA foam will dull the heck out of it. Not pool noodle foam though, that doesn't seem to bother it. Oh, this is where you could also use a box cutter instead of a saw. I'm really not sure why I'm using a saw here, because it's definitely overkill. I think because I was thinking steak knife, and I was recently inventorying my saws, so just at the forefront of my mind. I don't know. There's lots of ways to do this. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Is an expression you probably shouldn't use on the internet. It's full of cats. Once that cut is made, the C-shaped offcuts can be removed. I had to tape a few spots where the blade went a little bit too far, but for the most part, it worked. Worked out great. Next, I repeated that process on the other 2 noodles. You want to be really careful when you do this, that your cuts match up with the previous noodle, because a little bit of variation on each notch will eventually expand and then they won't line up. And then I taped those together. To do this, I chose black duct tape, not electrical tape. I then wrapped the bundle all the way down its length, spacing the strips out about 4 or 5 inches apart. Then I wrapped it with more duct tape. When I was confident that it wasn't going anywhere, I began attaching stuff. I ripped the strip in half to fit the width of the notches, and then I wrapped the strips around the bundle. That's mainly just to hold it together while I work. If I did each vertebrae one at a time, then the ends would be flailing around while I worked, knocking stuff off the workbench. It'd just be a nightmare. All the same, this is still very monotonous activity, so I decided to break it up a bit by working on the claw. Can we get a pitch shifter in here?
The claw.
There we go. Which by this time is ready for another coat of paint. You can see how it kind of flattened out with only 2 coats on it. That's why you gotta do 3. Alright, you guys have already seen me paint, so through the magic of editing, we're back at the noodles, and oh man, the vertebrae are all taped up. How'd that happen? So the reason I'm using duct tape here is because it both strengthens the sections and eliminates the need for paint. The project would take like a week if I had to paint the arm as well. Now that that's done, I can assemble the pieces. I used an offcut to trace holes in the wrist plates. I cut those out, I sanded those smooth with my rotary tool, then I realized I only needed to do one, so I undid the holes on the other one using sorcery! Nah, I'm just kidding, it was science. Well, carpentry, engineering. Yeah, let's go with that. You actually need to do one, and in the other plate, I cut small holes for the pulley ropes to feed through using a leather hole punch. Then I put strips of tape on the pattern side of one of the plates, and then taped that plate to the end of the arm. After that, I connected the fingers to the other plate with 2mm foam as a hinge. I put a foam dowel slice in the center and drilled out a hole for the eye. I put a red light in the middle, not a laser. You don't want lasers flailing around, that could be potentially dangerous. Then I hot glued the finger plate to the wrist mount plate. I threaded rope through it. This looks more difficult than it is. It's actually made a little bit easier because the notches in between the vertebrae allow a little access point for me to get to the rope. The ropes are held in place at the hand end by a knot and copious amounts of glue. By pulling on the ropes at the other end, I can affect the motion of the arm. I also ran fishing line through the noodles to move the fingers. Although to be honest, for the more precise hand movements, I helped it out a bit with the Green Man suit. That's a little messy, so I'm going to cover them up with guitar dials. So this conduit is just to disguise the rope and makes it look a little bit more machine-like, and also helps hide the purple a little bit. If you want to be really thorough, you can cover the purple up with tape, paint it with a non-aerosol based paint, or just deal with it like I am. But I think I can get rid of it in post. Hold me to that. Or don't hold me to it. Eventually it starts to bunch up, so I use the calipers to drag it the rest of the way. This one has just become profoundly useful. I'm so glad I picked it up. Not quite. Yeah, and then you have to alternate feeding it through up here and then threading it down there. It is a little monotonous, like a lot of this. Kind of like fixing a hoodie drawstring. Oh, also, that's what this comes in handy for most often. Rethreading hoodie drawstrings. So absolutely pick these up. See, I usually build for camera, which allows me more leeway, but if you're watching this trying to make a cosplay or a Halloween costume, then to keep the arms upright, you can make an internal structure out of PVC pipe. Just allow the arms to have enough dexterity that you can get through doors, you know? People don't think about that, or in and out of cars. Then, I did that 4 more times, and I was done. Now I can go see Spider-Man and annoy everyone sitting behind me in the theater. Jazz hands. Oh, I killed a bird. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, then you can like and subscribe, hit the bell icon to be notified of future uploads. I'd like to take a moment to thank my patrons. That's them scrolling by right now. These videos are incredibly time-consuming and expensive to make, and they only happen because of my patrons. Their support covers the expenses involved with running a prop shop, as well as maintaining all the tools and film equipment necessary to make the videos. If you'd like to join them so that I can continue to bring you quality content on a regular basis, then you can follow the Patreon link in the video description down below. Happy crafting! See you later. Oh god, I got cramp. Pulled a muscle in my back. How'd that happen? What if I just do? It doesn't help that I broke my toe a week ago. Worst Spider-Man ever. I think my eyes are misaligned. How did you do it, Toby?